Thank you very much. So please be welcome everyone to this afternoon's fireside chat around new ways to deliver healthcare services that engage patients from the convenience of their homes. As Nima said here, I'm Ulrika Sehlstedt. I'm partner in Dhd16 Management Consultancy, leading our healthcare and life sciences practice here in Stockholm. And I'm very honored to get the opportunity to moderate this exciting session. This morning, this annex to one of Sweden's largest morning newspapers was distributed. It has our Minister of Healthcare, Public Health and Sport on the front page, and it is fully dedicated to the subject of mental health. The burden of mental health for Sweden is huge, with yearly costs of more than 70 billion Swedish kronor, and more than half of these costs are related to sick leave and early retirement. Mental illness is today the primary cause of people in working age in Sweden being excluded from the labor force. Access to people trained to provide psychotherapeutic services like CBT and IPT has increased significantly between 2009 and 2014. However, accessibility is still a huge problem, as mental illness is increasing in the population. Also, stigma and discrimination are recognized as significant problems for people having a mental health diagnosis in Sweden and elsewhere. Relatives and also employees in psychiatric care are affected by stigmatization as well. So that is an introduction to this talk, where we have Kimberly Sirona. Kimberly is the founder and CEO of Teatros, a digital therapeutics company that is headquartered in San Francisco. With us on the scene, we also have Dr. Kim Norman. Dr. Norman is a psychiatrist at the University of California, San Francisco, where he is the UCSF Distinguished Professor of Adolescent and Young Adult Health. It was complicated, I had to read it. Kim founded and directs the UCSF Young Adult and Family Center, and is also UCSF Health Sciences Professor at the Wales Institute of Neurosciences. So my first question is for Kimberly. I know you've been a lot in Sweden and Stockholm and presented your company and talked about it publicly. But for those who don't know anything about Teatros, can you please explain what you're doing?
Yes, thank you. First, I should say this is my, I believe, 13th trip to Sweden. I've been coming once or twice a year for several years now, under a wonderful program between Sweden and the United States that puts on an annual forum every year. In fact, the next one is in a couple weeks here in Stockholm. Talking about my company is one of my favorite things to do, but first let me say that Kim is my husband and is also Teatros' chief psychiatrist. And after 40 years of happy marriage, we decided to take a chance and start working together to address a problem that is very important in the United States, and we believe here in Sweden too, the problem with mental health, and mental health being untreated for so many people and causing so many problems that the two of us really care about. Homelessness in the United States, of very high rates of incarceration, and very importantly to us, the 20 American veterans, military veterans, are committing suicide every day. So we decided to combine our respective resources, my company and its resources, and Kim's clinics and academic research capabilities at the university, to focus on a way of delivering psychotherapeutic services at scale. And Kim will explain much more about this in a moment, I'm sure. But what we do in a nutshell is put people in trusted groups within a secure social network where they can work together therapeutically to face their common health challenges and work together towards achieving their health and wellness goals. We deliver using telehealth methods a form of psychotherapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is in widespread use in the United States and, I understand, in Sweden. And finally, we are deploying and are very excited about the opportunity to expand the use of artificial intelligence to make psychotherapy available to millions, tens of millions of people who otherwise would not receive services.
Oh, it's fantastic. And Kim, you're having dual roles, both at the university and in the company. So what excites you about this work, please?
Well, what you began with when you talked about the prevalence of mental health challenges and mental illness, we know in the United States and in Europe, the statistics are the same. The lifetime risk of acquiring a mental health diagnosis is 50%. That is, 1 out of 2 people will be diagnosed with depression and anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, develop alcoholism, whatnot. So that means if 1 out of 2 people suffer, it means either you're going to suffer or certainly somebody you love is going to be suffering. Yet we know that only 20%, 1 out of 5 people who suffer ever get help for it. We also know that 75% of mental illness that's ever diagnosed is present by the age of 24. So intervening certainly with younger people is the way to go. Now, there are all kinds of barriers to people seeking mental health care. You've alluded to a couple of them. Certainly stigma, discrimination is a major barrier. Time and space logistics is another one. Dollar cost is another one. But also, even if in areas like in, for example, San Francisco, where we do have a relatively large number of behavioral health specialists compared to other places in the country and around the world, yet most of them are not trained in evidence-based practices. They may be nice people, but they actually don't know how to treat depression or anxiety. So there's also a challenge of how do you know the person you're going to knows what he or she is doing and is going to give me a treatment that's going to be effective for my condition. So that's led to our looking for ways to improve accessibility to care by scaling. Now, I think from my way of thinking as a psychiatrist, I think the internet was invented for psychiatry. It pulls information together. On the internet, if you're doing a video chat with a patient, we know doctors and patients feel equally connected, equally well engaged. Diagnostic acumen is equally good with the screen between us as well as if we were in person. But when you do an hour-for-hour video chat, there's no scale in that. It's still an hour of my time. It's still labor-intensive. It may make it possible for somebody who lives hundreds of miles away from a major city to have access, but actually does not increase the overall percentage of people in need of help to get help. The internet, we find, has other advantages. I thought that patients would say the internet's the next best thing, but I have many patients who say, I feel safer with the screen between us. I like not only the convenience of my living room, I like the safety that I feel. And many, many people tell us that they're much more open emotionally, instant messaging, sending texts, and communicating via the internet than they are actually in person. So that led to the idea of how we can use the internet to try to scale. What we do is, and what Theatros does, is it creates some YouTube-style videos that basically teach the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is an evidence-based therapy in widespread use in Europe and really around the world for treating anxiety and depression in particular. So you can watch some YouTube-style videos, do some personal exercises, then come online together for facilitated discussions, and we find that the outcomes are just as good, in fact, often better than in-person therapies because we have higher rates of completion. The first population we've applied this to is a military population, veterans coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan in the United States suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. We found first we taught the course in person on a college campus, and we found completion rates were quite low. People would come to class, probably be triggered by some of the content we were given. They'd be reminded and have flashbacks to traumatic military experiences and not return. When we do it online and present the content, but then have an ongoing discussion, so later that night, the next day, anytime they can post questions or comments and get support from other people, the compliance and completion rates went way up. So we have better compliance, better engagement, is the word I'm looking for, sustained engagement using the internet-based approach. We're able to demonstrate outcomes in a number of ways. One, certainly the completion rates. Another is we can show on standardized questionnaires that measure levels of depression, of anxiety, of post-traumatic stress, that people improve. We're also able to use natural language analytics using artificial intelligence to demonstrate that narrative writing, we have people spend a lot of time telling their stories, which, by the way, telling the story, if you've been traumatized, if you're frightened, if you can put words to it, you're already calming down the thinking part of the brain, calms down the fight or flight part of the brain, you're already feeling better. Sharing it with other people, healing is very social. Sharing it with other people further promotes healing, but we can demonstrate in the narratives that people go from writing a lot of negative emotions, hopeless, depressed, dark, bleak, I feel betrayed, angry, to, by the end of the intervention, feeling hopeful, I have my laughter back, I can tell my spouse what happened. We can see that in the content, as well as we can demonstrate that the openness and authenticity, how real people are being in the beginning toward the end of the course is much improved. So we're really very excited about these outcomes.
It's fantastic. So I think absolutely this is highly relevant for Sweden too, as we heard in the introduction, and we also have a country with quite different in terms of density in population in different areas of the country. So Kimberly, would you?
Yeah, well, I hope that's true because I'd like to headquarter our European office here in Stockholm someday. But Kim and I have spent the last few days in Stockholm talking to some of your government healthcare officials. And one difference that we've identified is in the United States, most doctors do not ask their patients about their mental health. I've never had a doctor ask me, do you get depressed? Do you get anxious? Do you have a problem with alcohol or other stuff? Never. And my entire life, where here your government officials told us that your doctors are required to ask, which I found very interesting. And in the United States, the reason doctors, by and large, don't ask these questions is because what if I say yes? What if I say yes, I get depressed? Maybe I'm suicidal or I'm so anxious I can't leave my home. What are they supposed to do? They don't have any service to offer. So I asked what I thought was the obvious question. Well, what do you do when your patients say yes? Because we know that in any given point in time, 20% of the people in the world are dealing with a mental health problem. What do your doctors say? And they say, well, we have a problem with services. And that really is what our company is focused on, is delivering behavioral health services, leveraging technology, including cloud computing and artificial intelligence to deliver these services.
And what was the response from the people that you talked to? Did they think that the solutions you presented were something that would be helpful here in Sweden?
Well, I'll let you. The answer that came back immediately was that one of Sweden's major new health initiatives is around finding means of providing treatment, particularly to teenagers and young adults, where apparently there's a very high incidence of these disorders. But it sounds to us like Sweden also has a dearth of available services.
Absolutely.
Yeah, many of my colleagues at UCSF who work in primary care and chronic disease management specialties tell me that they'll typically tell the patient, please don't cry in my office. I've got 30 people out in the waiting room. I don't have time to deal with this. And they don't feel good about that, but they don't have the time. They'll tell you that probably 80 to 90% of their time is taken up by 10 or so of their patients, mostly people who, yes, are suffering from, it could be cancer or heart disease or arthritis, but they're anxious, they're depressed, they're miserable emotionally and need a lot of support, and that they themselves are searching for solutions, ways to help people. One of the things we are trying to do is embed behavioral health specialists in the general medicine and chronic care clinics. But one of my colleagues tells me she went into a primary care clinic the first time about 6 months ago. And the day she walked in, they said, you know, you're heaven sent because we've been waiting 20 years for you. She had 20 patients waiting for her in a 3-hour block, and so she couldn't do what psychiatrists usually do. We spend time with our patients to get to know them as people. And then if you said, okay, we'll try to send 4 psychiatrists into the clinic, well, good luck recruiting them. There aren't that many psychiatrists, but also the economics get thrown off. You can't afford to have it. So they also are very eager to have scalable solutions so that instead of the don't ask, don't tell policy around mental health, we can ask you if you get depressed, and if you say yes, okay, go to this website, join this group, work together with this group on this protocol. Most likely that's all you're going to need. And if you need more beyond that, then we can consider medication or other kinds of approaches. It's not only more scalable in terms of reaching more people, it's actually better care currently because of the shortage of psychiatrists and because of the expense of labor-intensive one-on-one therapies. People suffering from depression or anxiety are most likely to be prescribed Prozac, and most of the time that's not necessary. Most of the time, a talking therapy approach, learning the skills and tools of cognitive behavioral therapy, add to it storytelling, add to that some mindfulness meditation, will treat the vast majority of people suffering from depression or anxiety without medications, without the stigma of taking medication, without the side effects of taking medications.
Yeah, it's fantastic, promising. What about, I mean, from a systems perspective, it sounds very promising and of course interesting, but what do the patients say themselves when they are using your solution? How do they experience that solution compared to other alternatives that they have been experiencing?
Well, the alternative solutions are things like, I called 10 behavioral health specialists who take my insurance. 9 of them did not even return my phone call, and the one who did was not taking new patients. So that's very frequently the experience of patients seeking psychiatry. Patients, as I said, surprised me because I really expected patients to say, well, internet's fine, and I am learning, I am growing, but you know, I sure wish I could be in the office with you. And it turns out that that's actually the minority of people. Others say, you know, I don't like walking into a psychiatric building. I don't like coming into the therapist office. And again, I feel safer, more comfortable, and more open with you on the internet. Some of my patients also tell me that I'm a little more attentive to them on the internet than I am in person, too, because I'll look out the window sometimes. But I mean, the point is that with compelling content, with the social support of other people going through the same protocol, and then enough touch points with me as a psychiatrist or another one of my therapists on my team, that's really sufficient for people. We know there's probably about a 25, 30-year experience now using the internet for psychotherapeutics. By the way, Scandinavian countries were the first to actually use it. And they really, there's really 3 kinds of internet-based mental health therapeutics. One is called computer-assisted therapeutics, and that is, instead of coming to my office for 20 visits to learn cognitive behavioral therapy, you could come once or twice, and I'll give you an overview. Then over the next 6 months, you're going to keep a journal, keep a track of how your thoughts affect your mood. You know, cognitive behavioral therapy is really about reframing negative thinking so that if a failure is not a failure, it's a learning opportunity, it's a growth experience. You learn a lot of ways to reframe disappointments in a way that are hopeful and positive. Anyway, computer-assisted means you have 1 or 2 doctor visits instead of 20, and then you exchange emails over a 6-month period, but people do just as well as with 20 in-person visits. Another form of internet-based therapeutics is fully self-paced self-help. So I can just say, go to this website, you know, watch the videos, do the exercises, keep coming back on, complete the course, and you do just as well. Only problem is only about 10% of people have the wherewithal to really do that on their own. If I say buy the book Feeling Good by David Burns on Amazon for $9, you do really well with it. 100% of people will buy the book, 50% will read the first chapter, 20% will read the whole book, and half of those will do the exercises along with the reading. That's fully self-paced. It works for those small percentage of people who have the wherewithal to do it. The third form of internet-based therapeutics is called guided self-help. And there you can go on the internet, watch a video, do some exercises, and you can call me for 10 minutes a week. But I'm not going to ask you, how's the wife, how's the kids? I'm going to say, okay, you completed module 1, seem to have gotten stuck in module 2, how do we get you unstuck? But then getting people to get through it works just as well as in person. What we're pioneering actually is, instead of the guide being a licensed clinician, you call it, for 10 minutes a week, the guides are each other. We put you together in a group of 8 to 12 people who are similarly working on overcoming trauma or anxiety or depression. And the group itself, the peer group, becomes its guide, supports each other in working through and completing the protocols.
Exciting. There is a commentator booth down there we've heard of. So is there anything from you in there?
Definitely. I think we're getting to interview you in a couple of minutes, which we're very excited about. But I think it's worth noting, and maybe this is a little bit of a teaser, that there's a lot of companies here and a lot of companies within digital health that are really focused on the technology. And you said that you were leveraging the technology. But I wanted to ask you what you thought about a lot of tech companies that are trying to replace psychologists with the excuse that some people are private or some people are introverts. Is it good enough? Can it do it on its own?
So you're asking whether or not technology can completely replace a human being? If that's a question, I think eventually...
Yeah, I just wanted to see what that.
I think you'd be surprised how effective non-humans can be. They're machines are not judgmental. Machines can actually learn to ask the right questions and give the right follow-up. I think as artificial intelligence gets better and better, the ability to have fully automated therapeutics will get better and better. You still need human beings in the chain somewhere. We find, for example, we presented our work with veterans at a conference. We received funding from the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation to do our study with veterans, and they gave funding to 12 other organizations that were helping veterans in different ways. Anyway, there was another group that also was treating depression in veterans by having them watch some videos, do some exercises. That would be more the self-paced, self-help. And when people came on just by themselves, they had about a 10 to 15% completion rate, pretty much what I described earlier. In their study, when they studied it, they had a 70% completion rate. And that difference was a graduate student who was a research associate, a nice person who would call once a week and say, hey, did you complete the module? Are you going to submit the forms? Are you with us? So that really is a guided self-help. But that guide, you need that guide. As artificial intelligence gets better, the automated guide will be more and more useful. But what we feel, you still have to bring the human touch there. Now, what we think we're going to be able to do is the therapist can be a computer. The human touches that you need will be with the other human beings who are taking the course along with you. And so we think we would get the best of both worlds that way.
That's really the element of what we're doing that is most exciting to me. We basically automated Kim's expert level of psychotherapy to teach the basic principles of CBT plus. But then we put people in a secure, safe environment with other people who are facing the same life challenges, whether they're women dealing with postpartum depression, or they're people who are anxious and depressed because they have cancer and are on chemotherapy, or they're sexual assault victims, or whatever else. But we put people with these common life experiences and common goals, and the amount of support they can provide to each other is really incredible. And it's incredibly therapeutic. And that's what that's what's exciting me, the feedback we're getting there.
And Fantastic. Yeah. I think that's a great intro to our interview later. I'd love to discuss AI. We haven't really discussed AI yet. I don't know if you have a last question for this session.
Actually, no.
Okay. Well, we would love to invite you guys down to the cage after this for a short interview.
Yeah, one of the Teatros is partnered with IBM Watson using the Watson natural language analytics. And it's a study that was just published a couple of months ago where graduate students, in graduate school, you have a professor, but typically you have teaching assistants who are reading your papers and giving you feedback. So they had 9 graduate students with teaching assistants, and not a single one of them could tell that their teaching assistant was Watson. That Watson was actually reading their papers, giving them very good feedback on it, and they were benefiting and learning.
And Kimberly, maybe you can describe a little bit more about this collaboration with IBM or Watson. What is your intentions now? How will you develop your technology and solutions further?
So what we are doing is integrating a multitude of analytic capabilities, including Watson. And Watson is a collection of modules that have different attributes. I mean, we're using one called Personality Insights, for example, that really looks at people's, how would you describe that, Kim?
Well, Watson can take 2,000 words of your voice from any medium. It could be an essay you wrote, emails you sent, or give me your cell phone. We'll get the last 2,000 words of text messaging. And we'll assess personality along the classic so-called Big Five. The English acronym is OCEAN. O is for openness, C is for conscientiousness, E is for extroversion, A is for agreeability, and N is for neuroticism, or basically emotional reactivity. They'll also look a little bit at your basic human needs, like a need for love, a need for excitement, a need for meaning and purpose, and values, beliefs that inform decisions you make, and come up with a personality profile that's just eerily accurate. Put it that way. It's really quite amazing. But what we're looking at is how we can study personality and identify which personality traits may be protective against developing conditions like anxiety disorders and PTSD, which personality traits may make you more vulnerable, and how to gear our interventions accordingly.
Yeah, very interesting. What about the audience? Do you have any questions to Kim and Kimberly? No one? Okay, so let's for a moment. Thank you so much for a moment, and I'll be back. And meanwhile, we should also introduce to the scene Ulrika Akenine. Welcome. Who is a research nurse and study coordinator at the Karolinska University Hospital and Karolinska Institute. And your research is focusing on understanding what motivates patients to participate in clinical trials. And another part of your research is studying how to recruit and also retain patients in prevention studies aimed at changing behaviors with the support of digital tools. Right?
Oh.
Yeah?
That's correct.
So today you're going to tell us how to get engaged patients.
Yes.
The magic
So
bullet.
thank you very much for the invitation. It's very nice to be here. So I'm actually leaving my house. We heard that expression early this morning. I'm leaving my comfort zone from my hospital and my academic world and meeting you here, and it's very exciting. So why do patients participate in clinical trials? I think we need to... I found it. Okay, you want me to use this one? Okay. So I need you to give you a little bit of context for these questions. Yesterday, it was the International Alzheimer Day. I heard that you were speaking about diabetes yesterday, and now we're going to dementia and Alzheimer. It's a huge challenge for the society. It's not just afflicting lots of people in a very personal way, it's an enormous cost for the society. Actually, the cost for dementia and Alzheimer care is more than all cancer and cardiovascular disease together. So there's lots of companies that are really interested in finding the cure for Alzheimer. But today we are not going to talk about the research, we are keeping a patient perspective. So I have 20 years experience as a nurse, last 10 years as working only with clinical trials. So let's focus only on the patients, or the study participants, or the persons, or whatever we should call them here today. So, why is it important to know what the participants think about being part of research? So let's look back what's happened. 10 years ago, the participants were only people. They were subjects 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and so on. Today, the studies are really challenging for the participants. We are asking them, I will show you some pictures. We are asking great amount of work from our participants. So we actually need our patients, our participants, to be active. We need them to be more of a partners in research. So let's have a look at this participants. I'm working in the field of Alzheimer research, and we recruit patients for different kind of Alzheimer trials. And why it is really important to know who is this yellow little figure there. So we can look at the researcher's eyes. The researcher have a protocol that he has to follow to do this trial. And then we have inclusion and exclusion criteria. You have to have a person that is, let's say, 65 years of age. You should have certain biomarkers and so on to fit in this clinical trial. But that doesn't help us when we are going to recruit patients. Then we are going to look, who are these people really? And that is about getting to know our market. This is a person that we have to recruit and to retain in the study. So we have to look at the people's previous experience from healthcare, knowledge about the diagnosis that they are having, maybe living conditions are important, their personal economic situation maybe have a great influence if you are going to participate in a study or not, and so on. And then we have lots of different kinds of studies. We have this yellow little person with Alzheimer's disease, and we can put him in different kinds of trials. So we have this with a needle. We are testing a new drug for Alzheimer's disease. It's never tested in humans before. It's very demanding for the participants, and it's extremely costly studies for the pharmaceutical companies. So how do we recruit people to this? Do you want to be the first man trying a new drug, doing something in your brain to maybe remove a little protein somewhere? Well, maybe not. So is it easier to recruit patients for this other kind of trials? The preventive trial. In the last session, we heard something about the prevention in the future, and that's what we are aiming for. The drug trials, we have seen a lot of these, but unfortunately, we haven't seen that much of a success during the last 10 years. So what we are looking forward to is this new kind of prevention trials. They are aiming at risk factors. So basically, we ask the participants to exercise, change their diet, and so on. So is it easier to recruit patients for this kind of trial? So we ask the patient to do this risk-benefit calculation. In the drug trial, it's a never tried, it's a new drug, potentially dangerous drugs. And maybe the last point on that section is we are only testing for safety. We are not testing for effects. Or the other kind of trials, the preventive trial, there's no harm in changing your diet, hopefully, but it's a lot greater of effort. So to get a little more deeper insight, we have to take a look at what we actually are asking the participants to do. So in a drug trial, what does it look like? It's demanding. This is a 14-month study. We ask the participants to visit the clinic up to 45 times. They have to do MRI scan, PET scans, lumbar punctures, and so on. In a prevention trial, we actually ask the patients to change their lifestyles completely. We ask them to go to the gym 2 or 3 times a week, to be active, to change their diet, and because it's research, we want to measure things. We do that a lot. So visits to the clinic, MRIs, blood samples, and so on. So actually, I will give you the answer to why people participate in drug trials. Helping science and contributing to research, that's the absolutely main reason for people to participate in early phase drug trials. We have components of hope and ease for cure, but the main thing is pure altruistic reasons. The patients want to contribute to science. In the preventive trials, of course, the patients are more interested in getting health benefits. So that's the motives for participating. But let's have a look at the expectation, because that's another thing. When we have recruited the patients into the trial, we want to keep them there. And that's because it's extremely bad for research to have dropouts. And it's extremely expensive to have dropouts. So we have to meet our participants with some kind of results of their expectations. And what do this looks like? And the first thing is information. And this comes up every time we do interviews or focus groups with participants. They want information. And they want information about the disease, about their own diagnosis that they have, but they also want information what's going on in research. And this is actually quite easy for us to give them. But it's also very easy to forget to do this. So let's keep that in mind. The participants want information. They want to be taken care of, to feel safe, and they want access to medical expertise. And that tells us that that is something they don't think they have in the regular healthcare. Even though Alzheimer's disease is one of the most common diseases among elderly people, the people don't think that they have enough medical expertise. So what's the concerns for participate in this kind of trials? Of course, they are afraid of side effects, risk of receiving placebo, pain, and this is the thing that always stands out as well. It takes time. For prevention studies, you see, information is one of the most important things. These participants also want information. And what really stands out for this is that they want information that they trust. We have heard this so many times today, the importance of trust. So it's a lot of information about diet, about exercise, but they want information that they really can trust. Individualized advice and tailored application. I think this is things you really like to hear. Concerns. Is the information correct? So even if we are dealing with people with a cognitive decline, they are concerned about that, is this really correct information that we are receiving? What happens with my data? Who has access to my data? Is it safe? Even people with cognitive decline have these concerns. And this is a result from every focus group that we have done on this subject. So let's stick with this prevention studies for a short while. Maybe you have heard that what's good for your brain is good for your heart, or other way around. And actually that's true. Cardiovascular disease and dementia share the same risk factors. Really good, we think. Let's do a huge prevention trial targeting these same risk factors. So we will use this shortly to just illustrate what kind of results we can get when we ask our participants what they think about prevention of these risk factors. So let's put some questions to our participants. So we have a little focus group down in the corner, and the researcher asks, can you tell me about the risk factors for cardiovascular diseases? Yes, we got all the right answers. Fine, we are on the right track. Maybe this huge preventive trial that we are going to do, we are going to ask them to exercise, we are going to ask them to change their food and everything. We will get engaged patients. They know all the answers. So next question. Can you tell me about the risk factors for dementia? Yes, they can. And we are a little bit surprised. This is a new area, but the participants are on track. They already knew all the risk factors. Is it possible to prevent cardiovascular diseases? Yes, says not all, but most of the participants. They agree. We can prevent cardiovascular diseases. Is it possible to prevent dementia? Yes. And now, as researchers, we are really happy. We are almost there. They think we can prevent dementia. So we don't have to divide these studies. We can just make it to one big trial. But we have to dig a little more deep and ask them, do you believe that you can prevent cardiovascular disease? And yes, hopefully, yeah. Yes, they said. And now, we're almost there. The study can start. Do you believe that you can prevent dementia? No. Maybe we're not surprised, but not happy. Because now we are having a study starting, maybe 100, 1,500, 2,000 participants. And maybe half of them don't believe in what we are going to ask them to do. So even if they are giving us all the right answers, they know about the risk factors. And they say that it is possible to prevent dementia. They don't believe it. You are cursed with this disease. If you get it, there's nothing you can do. You can't avoid it. So here we have information. They have all the information, but they haven't been able to transform this information to personal knowledge. So what are we looking at? Now we have to be careful looking into the minds of our participants. And what we see is results of stigma, and we have heard that earlier today. Alzheimer's disease are still surrounded by a huge stigma that actually, even if all these participants have the information, they know how to answer, they can't believe in what we are asking them to do. This is attitudes in society. We are dealing with problem at the global level. But we also see fear. And we have had an excellent example from the cage earlier, how fear can actually make the individual act totally inadequate. So if we can use the fear to make the participants do what we ask them to do, but that's not always the case. And stigma and fear together very often just make the people forget all about it, turn their back to the study or to the intervention. Just want to forget all about it. And then just at the end, to complicate this a little bit more, let's place this participant in different countries and see what we find. In the Netherlands, we found the participants to have a little less knowledge about the prevention as a concept. And maybe that's not true, but in Finland we found them to have a little more knowledge about the prevention as a concept. And maybe that's due to that Finland are very used to deal with the risk factors of cardiovascular disease. In Finland, we find a very high trust to the national guidelines of health-related issues, diet, exercise, and so on. In the Netherlands, the participants value the personal contact very high. They didn't want to participate in the trial unless that their general practitioner had asked them to. In Finland, both health personnel and participants were much more positive to web-based interventions. They could even give us some examples that they could see advantages of not having to communicate face-to-face. So let's summarize this up. The motives for participations persist through the study. The expectations, though, we have to be very careful about this. The expectations change during such a long study, and we have to meet the patients or the participants and their expectations. And why is that important? Because we want high quality in the study. We want few dropouts. So we have to really take care of our participants. The expectations are not always realistic. So let's try really early on in this kind of trials or studies to help the participants to set realistic goals. So finally, differences in individual, local, cultural context has great influence on the individual's motives and expectations. And hopefully, this experience from science can help you develop your future projects. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ulrika. Come over here, please. So I was thinking about the cultural differences that you were talking about and highlighting towards the end of your presentation. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, and particularly in respect to Theatros here, who is intending to expand their business to Europe? What advice would you give to them in this context?
Yeah, of course, Europe, it's more than 40 countries, 40 languages. I don't think that's a major problem. But these differences in culture, in the way people have attitudes to certain diseases, to certain diagnoses, and differences in the healthcare system, not maybe the regulatory things, but more who owns the question of the person's health, who is responsible for the person's health. And we see we saw this in this study very, very clearly that in the northern part of Europe, both patients and the health personnel thinks that it's the person themselves that are responsible for the person's health. While in the southern part of Europe, it's a GP, it's a doctor or the health care that are responsible for the person's health.
Interesting. And Kimberly and Kim, you have already had some contacts with different countries, of course. How are you thinking about these cultural differences, and how are you thinking that you will need to adjust on your approach in getting in here?
Well, I think it's impossible for a U.S. company to deliver healthcare services to Sweden or China or the Middle East. I think our technology and our products are applicable to other markets, but they need to be delivered by a local company that is sensitive to the cultural issues. The language localization is trivial. We've already, in the United States, many languages are spoken, and we've already started localizing our product, but localizing it for culture, I think, requires local people and a local company.
So there is an opportunity program here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would say, too, what's true across all cultures in regards to behavioral health, mental health, is concerns about stigma. Some cultures more so than others, but every culture has worries about privacy. So the first challenge that Teatros took on and solved was the challenge of creating privacy, that the social media platform that is Teatros meets all of the United States federal laws on HIPAA's Health Information Privacy and Portability Act. So we can promise confidentiality so your information stays there. In terms of your dichotomy between the Northern Europe, where people feel more of a personal responsibility for their health, to me, that the way to handle that then is you can market directly to consumers, saying, take care. When we say health, we mean body, mind, and spirit. We should not separate mental health from general health. The two are connected. Anxiety is a risk factor for heart disease and dementia and preterm birth and so many other conditions. So marketing to people who believe they should take care of their own health directly, and they can sign on directly. In Southern Europe, where they turn to their primary care doc, he or she could be the one to refer them to this intervention.
Yeah.
Commentator booth. Do you have a final question from there?
Well, actually, I have more of a comment. I'm a researcher, and I believe quite strongly that what we're doing with patient trials and medical research is absolutely backwards right now. I mean, we're developing the research, we're getting the money, and then we're using people as guinea pigs, and then we're surprised that the dropout rates are high, and the recruiting is tough, and they don't appreciate the little information that we're giving them. And we need to be putting this in the hands of the patients, because they will absolutely drive this home, and they will keep the recruitment high, they will keep the dropout rate low, and they'll do this. But the way that we're doing medical research now is absolutely broken. Absolutely.
Would you like to comment?
Oh, no, I was just thinking of when we did our first intervention with military veterans, the first thing they asked us was, are we your guinea pigs? And, I said, kinda. And they said, okay, we're used to that coming out of the Army. But actually, more putting the emphasis, as you did, on the meaning and the purpose, that actually people saying that, look, we're not going to do anything with you, that we're not going to hurt you. You're going to help us get better and help other people, is itself therapeutic. That what we find is so powerful in a group is that I'll go, I'm not so sure how much it's going to help me, but I really like that other person in the group, and I'm going to help him, and I'm going to help her, and that starts to make me feel better about myself as well. So getting that meaning, that purpose, that sort of pro-social aspect of contributing to the advancement of medicine is really a powerful motivator.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and as I said in my introduction, the burden of mental health in Sweden is huge, and significant stimuli has been put to increase accessibility, but it is still a real challenge. But there are solutions. We have learned that today. So let's hope that theaters make a reality of their plans of expanding into Europe and giving our citizens these solutions as well. So with that, I would like to thank all of you for being here, and a warm applause to Kimberly, Kim, and Ulrika.
Thank you.
Thank you.